some other things. So there was an edit, it said sue, it should have said use, that's taken care of. There was an increase in 0114105110, 007. Scott, do you know what line that is? No, it's a 1410.
So line again, 1410.
It's in the,
1410 5110
that was the environmental school chaperones.
All right, so that's done. ESY, we took care of. Scott's researching the NEWA assessment and the questions. We added a note to read New Hampshire College and Career Ready Standards instead of CCSS. Okay, so trash removal,
Touch base on that.
go for it.
You have a contract with Waste Management. That contract runs until 12/31, 12/31/19. We are at the point, and Linda has already been asked to rebid that. The reason why we're moving now to do this is that if we don't, that contract automatically renews for another year. So we're within, I'll call it the realm of not violating the contract. At the same time, it makes sense to reach out and get prices. So we're not making any changes yet, but we are gonna have Waste Management and some other vendors submit fresh numbers.
Perry, did you have someone to recommend when we had that discussion, other than Waste Management?
Yeah, Shipyard. Those are two other local ones now.
So maybe we can invite them to.
We can invite anybody you want, actually.
They have to respond.
Right.
Well, if they don't respond, they don't respond.
Then there was a question about when the maintenance size would increase to $700
On the security system.
on the security system, and it's due to service calls with the new system.
Gary's already over his budget on this, on that, and we have increased the budget on the security system maintenance just for the very reason that it's a little bit more expensive to maintain.
And then there was a question about the food service line, the 2%, I just addressed that. And then we talked about the 4,500 non-food milk line, and that takes care of everything, I believe, for now, except for the stuff I have to do.
I just want to back up. I would suggest that if we are not allowed to turn back any extra from the food service to the general fund, if you find that that has not changed, that we reduce that line to the actuals. So we don't want to have a surplus. in
Why don't we
food
bring in the
service.
information on the 12th, and then you folks can do that.
What do you mean by reduce it to the actuals? Just use the actuals from the previous year? Even if we know that the expense may be going up?
I think what we need to do,
I see what you're saying.
I think what we need to do is gather the
Yeah,
information,
I get it.
present it to the board on the 12th, and have the board decide on what to do.
I will explore that further.
Any further questions on the budget?
I do have a question.
You have a question on the budget?
No, I think I have a later question.
Okay. All right, let's move on from the budget. Now we're gonna go through it again next time with any other changes. And we'll be working on it, as you said, it's a full document until the January meeting. Even after that, before the March meeting, so.
And we won't have the SAU final numbers in the next meeting, will we? Oh, maybe we will. It's 2 days
Well,
before.
you'll know 'em.
Can't lose the next one.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right now, we may be able to turn that around pretty quickly, we may not. Later in the agenda, I need to talk to you about the 12 meetings, so I'll bring that up. You want me to just do it now? Go ahead. So, on
Scott
December,
has a family obligation.
I'll be on, I'll tell you exactly what I did. My daughter's being inducted.
You're proud of it.
I'm
Did you
so
get-
proud of saying, is that camera on? On the 12th, there's potentially a Northwood Budget Committee meeting and your meeting. The but my daughter's being inducted into National Honor Society, and I think it's very important that I'm there.
Sure.
So either Bob or Nate will be here, and one will be in Northwood. And I apologize, but I did try to get them to change it. So that's where I'll be that night. So thank you. I announced it to everybody. I'm a very proud father.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, her.
Yeah, congratulations her.
The other thing about budget is I'd like to explore the date for the meeting.
Okay.
So last year it was on March 10th.
Oh, the district meeting.
Yeah. Because what I have to do is come up
Back
with a date and then give it to Attorney Graham and have him back up the calendar so we meet our deadlines. So I would imagine you just want to go with the same date, which will be the 11th. But the question I have, and I'll have Mrs. West explore this with the town, is when does the town have it? Voting's after that. But I want to make sure we don't have a conflict with the town meeting date. So I'm going to go with the 11th.
We like to be we like to do it. Oh wait, are you still talking about having it on Saturday? Or?
I'm doing the same date that you did last year. For now, you want to
Oh,
change it?
do you want to
that's
change
fine.
it to a weekday?
The 11th is a weekday.
No, how,
What is?
what date is close to the 10th, the Saturday?
I don't
The
know.
9th.
The 9th, it'll be the 9th.
No, I just was wondering what you.
Am
I
getting
just
that
used last year's to bring to tonight.
It would be great for the election.
Your elections are,
Or the 10th? No.
Now, whatever the blizzard is in March.
Well, the thing is, we have to have.
Well, we had it
the
earlier
Sunday.
this year, we don't know.
If we
we
have-
had a snow day on the 14th last year, I can just align it. to the
So if
30th.
we had the Saturday, then we'd have to have it on Wednesday, would be the day after election, would be the snow day.
Correct.
So I used just someone. You gotta do people think.
That's good, because I have 3 budgets.
Second Saturday, Misty, is it?
The 9th.
Okay. It's gonna be the 9th, Scott. Those are always on Tuesday.
Right.
That's
It's
what I-
gonna be the 9th.
Right.
And
I think
and
it's
then
the
your
second
snow date will
Tuesday.
be the 13th? Correct. All right.
And we wanna make sure the town.
We'll get in touch.
Is on the 9th, that's all.
Yeah, we'll get in touch with the town and see what we can do there. And if the town's on a different day, then I'm just gonna have the calendar done for you. Okay?
And then we go the 16th.
Right. All right. Okay. The calendar.
And then you're gonna have the attorney back up on the days for the January hearing, is that what you're gonna do?
Yeah, I've already got Northwoods and Nottingham. As soon as I can give him their deliberative session date, back plans and stuff get done.
Do we have the January dates?
The attorney will back in.
So what I need to do is give the attorney the date of your meeting, and then by statute, he has to plan backwards.
I see.
It's usually the last week of June.
Yes, that's what it usually is. It's like, it's a regular board meeting night, a Wednesday.
Yeah, it's the last, it's usually the last
Right.
Wednesday of June.
All right, thank you. And then, I know, I'm sorry to keep going back to this, I know there's always a question about adequacy, and I remember something from last year, so we did for the board. During your adequacy estimates,
Oh, that's right, because it's right after Thanksgiving there, we get that, yes.
oh, look,
Great.
it's right after Thanksgiving.
That's exactly when they come out. Do they just come out?
No, I had, no.
Oh, they come out November 15th?
Yeah, yeah.
Very strong.
Yes, thank you. Last time we got it in
And
January.
just so you know, last year's adequacy was 1.994. 2018 was, no. Right, that's right. 1994, so it's gone up. Got it, you're up, it's gone up.
6,000.
6,000.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Yeah.
And I think if you pulled out worksheets, you can see where that increase came from. But I just thought I'd share that with you. I know some people think that's really important. It is.
It is.
That's it for me for budget.
Okay, so we're moving down. Mr. O'Sullivan, do you have anything else on the business?
I don't have anything else.
Thank you.
If you want me to make some mistakes, I can reduce your budget further.
Yeah, I think we don't need Mr. Sullivan. I'm done.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you,
We will see you on the 12th.
Yes.
thank you.
Get that thing. See you all at 12th.
Okay, so I'll go down.
You're good. That was good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I know, but you gave a lot of questions tonight. Okay, we are on to you, Dr. Young.
My report starts on page 28, really kind of a focus tonight on professional development, professional learning at Stratford, with a couple update pieces and some other pieces that are sort of new that we're just starting to engage in. And I'm not going to obviously read through the narratives of everything, but there's quite a bit of information on the team cohesiveness and organizational health work that we've been doing. I've talked about it a few different times as a real focus for us as we have opened the school year. And you can see that we finished the school-wide read. We basically have used a survey tool that really looks at the 5 behaviors or 5 elements of a cohesive team, which are vulnerability-based trust at the base, looking at productive conflict, which creates commitment, which creates accountability, accountability creates results. Those are the 5 factors of a cohesive team. The survey tool that we used as a leadership team, a school-wide leadership team, which was the first step in our rolling this out, was to really have the school-wide leadership team engage in the same training and do so with a lot of depth with the consultant that we work with. This step was to really then have the team leaders, each of our team leaders, guide and lead that work with their individual teams. They experienced the training, they've experienced the concepts, we've experienced some of the activities that really were important for us to look at our cohesiveness as a school-wide leadership team. It gave them a context to then try to translate that and mirror that same process with their grade level teams. The school-wide read was a sort of our first piece of really getting everyone's head wrapped around what this looks like and to try to make it practical, which was a challenge at times because the text reads it's a fable about a business. And so sometimes seeing how it translates to a school was part of what we worked through, but I think we were able to do that. The survey, every member took this survey, which is pretty significant because you're really looking at creating feedback that could engage some difficult issues. I mean, and that's part of what we're trying to do. So this is not easy work necessarily when we think about team cohesiveness. Every team has done that. Every team leader then helped to lead. We had resources to really provide it through the table group for each team leader to lead the discussion on what the results look like for their team. Obviously, you know, it's kind of typical. If you get green on a particular area, like vulnerability-based trust, that means the bank of questions related to that area you're doing pretty well on. You know, orange means maybe something to look at. Red means this is something we really need to sort of prioritize. So every group has engaged in that conversation, every team with their team leader, and has thought about what kinds of goals they want to set for their team towards what the table group calls a rallying cry, which really is just a school-wide goal. And I've mentioned that here in my narrative. Our school-wide goal is to create healthy and high-performing teams by the end of February. Again, that's not to say we don't have teams that aren't performing well in different areas and in different ways, or that don't have areas of cohesiveness and real health, because every team does. But it's always good to take a look with real depth to say, how can we strengthen, how can we improve? We had an opportunity to wrap this process up at a school-wide or staff-wide meeting. I was able to engage in really some conversation with the entire staff about some feedback I'd received from the leadership team around things. Basically, it's an exercise of saying, allowing each team member to answer 2 questions related to anyone on the team. And I was the first to go, because I'm the leader for the school-wide leadership team, and we did this same practice with the consultant, which was, Scott, we want you to keep doing, and then fill in that blank. Every team member talked about keep doing this, and then Scott, we want you to stop doing, or we want you to do this differently. And so those pieces, that was the piece I focused on, because I want the staff to see that I'm hearing feedback that's about growth for me. This isn't about say you go and do that, that's for you. It's really all of us doing this together. So the three things they mentioned were, we want you to see more visibility in the building, we want you to work on communicating with greater clarity, and we want to see you be more assertive or decisive, at least in certain areas, in certain ways. So that was great feedback for me, not easy necessarily to hear, but by sharing that with the staff created a real moment of what vulnerability-based trust looks like, because everyone's going, oh, why is that important? That was an aha moment for us as a school-wide staff to say, I'm showing it, I'm demonstrating it, I'm modeling it. And so a lot of light bulbs coming on at that wrap-up meeting this week, because we concluded this work through the survey work. The next steps are around focusing on creating clarity, which is the second discipline. I sent the board a PDF today, which you might or might not have had a chance to look at as an attachment. There's basically 6 questions that every organization needs to answer in order to create clarity, and that's our new focus point. The leadership team has already done work answering each of those 6 questions. At the meeting I just mentioned, where we wrapped up our assessment process, we gave that document to every person, and then I sent it out as a PDF as well. What the leadership team said, for instance, why do we exist, which is in my narrative the first and primary question when it comes to creating clarity. We exist to inspire students to improve themselves, their community, and the world around them. Mine was, we inspire students to create a more just world. That was mine. I really like that. But we kind of made it more practical, a little more concrete. And we're going to come back to those 6 questions on clarity, and really as a staff at our December meeting, chew on it a little bit, because for the rest of the staff, the leadership team, it wasn't new content. For the rest of the staff, it really was the first time they had a chance to look at how we were answering, why do we exist, how do we behave, what do we do. And so that's where we are. The next steps are really to consider clarity, and then we want to do another, just like we would with students when we progress monitor, we want to do another assessment on team cohesiveness and health prior to February to gauge, how are we doing, are you meeting those goals that you set as an individual team, and what do we need to do next to improve? So we do plan to do another assessment of some kind for everyone to gauge progress prior to February. So to me, this is the stuff that matters, because when not to say that other things don't, but what I'm saying is, as a foundation, this conversation, I think, has become a more and more relevant and important conversation for the staff and faculty. So I want to recognize that I can tell you that I got feedback directly in that meeting that I just mentioned from one of our staff members that showed me that if there are any skeptics left, we had got them all. So it was really good stuff, recognizing that people were really investing in seeing the relevancy, seeing the importance of this work. So I'm excited about these next steps, looking at clarity, and then sort of gauging our progress around creating high-performing and healthy teams. But everyone has come around and really done some great work in terms of that piece. I mentioned in here a meeting tool that we're using, which has been phenomenal for us, because we have now begun the practice as a school leadership team at looking at some of these key questions. So every leadership meeting, we go to, why do we exist? We want everyone to know that. And especially as a leadership team, we want to know that. So the tool, which I can show at some point if you guys would like to see it, really gives us structure around the work that we've done, which I've encapsulated over the last few board meetings. It gives us that at the front. There's embedded resources and tools. For instance, the why do we exist question. You can go to a tool that gives a quick video basically of Peter Lencioni, who's really the guy who's conceptualized all these things, talking about each of those disciplines and why they're important. So if you ever need a reminder, you literally have a 2-minute video you can access that's embedded in the tool. And then the rest of it really has to do with, it's essentially an agendaless meeting, which is something we've been practicing already, but this tool allows us to really ask the question in a lightning round format, 30 seconds for each team member, what is absolutely most pressing for your team right now? And then it allows us to prioritize what those responses are, and then to really look at how we're going to clearly communicate any decisions we've made with the rest of the staff and faculty. And so the tool, like I said, it would be easier or better for you guys to see it than for me to explain it, but it's really been impactful for us as a leadership team to stay on point with the work that we started in September.
Now you have buy-in by everyone, I think.
like I said, for me, that was a moment that said, okay, we're doing pretty well. Yeah, I think. And I don't know if you ever get 100% buy-in unless you're giving out $100 bills. I think everyone probably buys into that, but I think we're right about as high as you're gonna get, which is good. Next piece is just on competencies and project-based learning. There's a rather lengthy narrative that goes to page 29 again, which I won't read. But it really is the next step from the curriculum work that we've done, the curriculum alignment work that we've done, the looking at focus standards, and also some of the work that individual teaching teams are doing, really tracking focus standards in the instruction. This is the next step really towards looking at competencies. We've decided to really look at project-based learning, which is not the same as competency-based education, but they're very closely related, as a way to bridge into competency work. So Heather Driscoll, who was here today, actually working with 2 different teams. We have a work-related skills team that's looking at things like 21st century learning skills, communication, collaboration, creativity, and so on. They're working on a set of competencies around our key question, right? So think about our thematic question is, why do we exist? We exist to inspire students to improve themselves, their community, and the world around them. That's going to be our linchpin for developing these project-based learning units. And it's the linchpin for what each team, the non-academic or work-related skills team, as well as the academic team that's going to work on writing competencies, that's the theme that they're all looking at as they develop those competencies. So we've taken our first step with Heather Driscoll helping to lead some of that work with each team. We have 3 teachers in each team that are creating some groundwork, and then we're going to be bringing this out to a full launch, in part in our December staff and faculty meeting, but then also in our January meeting, our January teacher workshop day coming back from the winter break. We will be going for a deep dive because we have a whole day to really invest the time. And so that will be really where the groundwork will be done, so teachers aren't having to create something from scratch. Our teams will have worked. They're all scheduled out, each team, to meet with Heather 2 or 3 different times prior to the January teacher workshop date. And then they will be launching into really developing these project-based learning teams around that key question of why do we exist. So it's our next tangible step into thinking about competencies. Thoughts on that?
When do you think that you'll have competencies completed for each major subject?
It's a giant
This is
question.
our process.
I know it's a process, I wonder how long the process is going to take, because we were
So-
mandated to have these in place.
We can still be working on it.
Okay.
Yes,
You're not.
I hear what
You
you're
know,
saying, and I think that there's different approaches. I was at a workshop today, 2 of them that talked about competency work, and so there was 3 different districts between the 2 presentations, 2 different workshops that ended up presenting. There was very little commonality between those 3 districts in terms of how their entry point into competencies. Some said we kind of stumbled into it. We started with standards-based grading, and then we thought, should we have thought about competencies first? But we'd already done that. Anyway, the point is that the most important part is to have a concrete, clear entry point, because it's the idea that they talked about it today. Competency-based education was being floated around in the 1970s. It's not really entirely a new idea. The breadth of it and some of the depth of it and how it's being applied directly into education is a bit of an innovation, but the conversation on competencies is really not a new one. The problem is that depending on who you ask, whether it be especially an educator, for their building, their district, or whatever, or even if they're not engaged in competency work, what they know about it, you're going to get a different answer from nearly everyone, at least in some form, about what even a competency is. So for me, the most important part is to start with something that's not overwhelming for teachers, something that's tangible and credible for them in terms of buy-in, and something that we can develop these 2 teams. And again, these teams were directly developed based on the work that we did this summer. Heather Driscoll attended the competency conference that we went to. We had specific conversations strategically around what might be an entry point for competency education with her in our debrief times as a team. And now she and I worked at the front of in the fall to really develop this plan. This narrative is what I wrote based on my work with her for preparation and really planning. Now we're into implementation, which is to me the most important part. There are some school districts that basically say, okay, you see those model competencies that the New Hampshire DOE has done, which are wonderful, I'm not saying they're not, they are, but they just say, yep, do this. My caveat with that approach is I don't know if that really is a strong way to truly implement competencies. I think that we want to be deliberate about it, and we want to, if it means taking the longer view in mind, so that we can meaningfully and with clarity and with depth actually implement true competencies, I think that's a better trade-off than trying to superimpose what some other school district has already laid out. So you think about Sanborn Regional District School, who is sort of the, I mean, they're not the only one, but they're one of the primary, I don't mean just in New Hampshire, I mean regionally, nationally even, around competency-based education. You're talking about 8 to 10 years. I'm not saying that there's a lot of templates already out there. I'm not saying we need that time. I'm trying to give context for, they did this from the ground up. And I think however you do it, if you're gonna do it well, it has to be from the ground up.
So-
Have you done it back into social competencies first?
And that's part of what we're doing with that work-related skills team. They're looking at
Get
those.
parents used to the system before you go with the academic-based competencies.
Right.
If I could just echo some of the things that Dr. Young was saying, even within your SAU,
Mm.
the three schools are different places implementing concept, and it shows them different entry points. The other issue that I see is if you just steal, which Simon Steele will share, Sanborn's competencies, or Oyster will share those. You can take them, you can give it to your staff and say, we're gonna implement that, but they haven't done the work to gain the context to how to teach the competency and how to adjust the instruction. So it really needs to be the hard work of the teams that create a system of fidelity. And each school, because it's different culturally, right? We've got groups of people who act different ways. The administration has to enter at different points. And there's significant confusion about competencies, which are called proficiencies in Maine. And so one way that we can break that down is stop talking about competencies and call them transfer skills. Right? Because that's what they are.
Transferable skills.
They're transfer skills, right? So you got your district competencies, which are your sort of stepping stone competencies that bring you up to your graduation competencies. And your graduation competencies, when you graduate, those are your transfer skills. I can go and work in a team. I can read, write for a variety of purposes. I can drive in a variety of conditions. So your competencies are really your skills that you want the kids to leave high school with, so they're successful in college or the world of work or whatever technical training they have. Those are the outcomes of graduation. These guys are doing the grade level competencies to try to align transfer to co-com, just remove those skills. Hard work.
And I think there tends to be,
You know, I also see a significant part of competency education being mastery, right? And Dr. Young's right, and I've told this to other boards, I think. I pulled mastery charts from math from me in the 70s. So this is not a new thing to teach to, you're not going to move on until you master this, you become competent. So there's just lots of creative work that needs to go on, and it's not going to be linear in any way. I like things that are linear.
So there's no deadline to actually have competencies for each subject area. We have no deadline with the state.
You have state-provided models. So we have those, but the competency, those are competencies. But the competency work that Dr. Young is talking about is sort of transformational work, where this is just, here's what we've done for you. There is a deadline in rules. But
I think that, I mean, just even in attending the workshop today, which is similar to others I've attended, if you hear, so if there were 30 people at that workshop and that represented 20 school districts or 20 schools, every one of them are at some are saying we haven't started yet, some are saying we've done this piece but not that piece. So The implementation part, I think, as Bruce said, the most important thing is that you're engaging in the work and and that's something that you're doing active in a structured plan. I don't think there's a true, I don't think there's a solid expectation that by this date, because what Mr. Rooney said is absolutely true, this is transformational work. So to superimpose an expectation to have an artificial deadline would not match.
And I've tried to make it linear, because I'm sort of a linear thinker, so this is how I try to sort of couch it to the curriculum team. Is first, you're gonna do your alignment and standards work, right? Then you're gonna try to get a reporting system that's sort of standards-based. Then you're gonna work to make those standards and benchmarks fit into your overarching competencies. So, while it's not a linear progression, I try to say this is where you're at working towards this, because that's what they're doing. And everybody's in a different place, and everybody's in a different place all over the state. Right? I mean, you go to a workshop about competencies, and there are people who are huddled in the corner when they're starting.
Yeah.
And then there are people who are looking like rock stars, and then you're sitting there confused. So, just being honest, it's work.
The last piece is just on readers and writers workshop support, which we're continuing this year. Dr. Bluthberg was with us again, working with teams on year 3 of implementation. So really now the expectation is with real depth and fidelity across the grade levels, and I think that we have that, which is awesome. I think it shows in what our students can do and what our receiving teachers experience this year versus what they experienced 3 years ago, 4 years ago, in terms of what students are able to do in writing is phenomenally different in a good way. So that's work that we're continuing. I do have some additional Title IIA monies unaccounted for intentionally because I want to fold in some math support and math professional development as well in the schedule, but we're kind of working on what that will look like.
And then off to travel.
Yeah, we're going to do that here. Yes, on site.
Personnel report, page 31. Got Don Small for DA coordinator and team manager that comes out of your local operating budget, a stipend of $1,200. Taya Fullwider, is that right?
Taja.
Tasha, sorry, I was close. As your DI team coach, we're stuck with $200 out of your local operating budget. And then your guidance counselor, Dave Pagnata, as a mentor, Reed, $1,000.
Make a motion to accept the person, we can do it after.
Sure.
Make a motion to accept the personnel report as presented at the November 28th, 2018 meeting.
Second.
Discussion.
Yeah, could you explain the mentoring?
I'll have the mentor, one of the mentor coordinators of the SAU do that.
Well, I've given up my.
Oh, that's right.
But,
Oh,
but I can
sorry.
still explain it. So what that does, what we do throughout the SAU, each district, they have mentors who work with new hires to help them along the process and learn what's going on in the school, how to follow the policies, what they are, what the procedures are,